Hello CS112, today I'll be going over a quick solution to Lab 5, which has to do with multi-dimensional lists. Per usual, I will be going through what you were supposed to do very quickly, and then go through a quick solution. So we were to create a function where we would calculate the final grade for a student. Our parameter student list will be a multi-dimensional list where each element is a student's info. What is a multi-dimensional list? Well, that is just simply a list where every element within it is another list. So let's observe our parameter student list down here. And they gave us, this is the example from the PDF. So as you can see here, what I just highlighted, that is a single list. We're passed through a single list. Now what do each of these elements look like? Well, there are two elements within this list, two sublists if you will. The first element is another list, and the second element is also another list. So within each of these sublists, where each sublist is a student's info, we are given the student's name, the student's G number, and finally another list in the third element or second index. Now, what are we going to return? Well, we're simply going to copy over the student's name and G number. Then we wanted to find the sum of the list of grades. So as you can see here, if you add all these numbers up, we're going to pop that in to our third element or second index of our return value. Same with Andy over here. Now, something important to keep in mind is on the PDF, this did say 95, I believe, but that was just a small typo. So now let's just dive right into it. Per usual, I like to create sort of a code skeleton, so when I'm going through and doing my code, it's much easier for me and I don't forget what I was planning. So this is what they gave you on the PDF, and this kind of implied they wanted you to create a new list. So I'm going to go ahead and say list of calculated sum, and I'm going to set that equal to an empty list. What's the first thing I want to do? The first thing I want to do is I want to iterate through each of these sublists, because right now I'm trying to think how I can get to this list right here, because that's the moneymaker of what I need to do my calculations. So first I want to iterate through student list sublists, which will be these big guys here. So iterate through student list. The next thing I want to do, and I'm going to indent it because I'm going to be inside this for loop now. I want to iterate through these guys, the actual sublists themselves. So now I'm going to iterate, through sublists. Now, what am I going to do inside these sublists? Well, if it is, sorry, I'm going to put that in the comments. If I'm inside the sublist and I'm at here, the second index, because 0, 1, 2, this is the second index. So if second index, I'm going to calculate the sum, then append to an inner list. Now, what do I mean? Why do I need to append it to an inner list? Well, right here, list the calculated sum, my return value, it looks something like this. It's just a regular list. So what do I want to do? I want to have an inner list in here to help create that, not sure what happened there. Here we go. To create this, these inner lists. So as you can see here, this will be one list and this will be another. So that's what I mean by append to inner list. If it's not though, so else, I want to still copy over these names. So when it's the 0th or the first index, I still want to copy it. So I'm not going to do any calculations, but I'm just going to say append to inner list. Now I sort of have the gist of what I need to do here, and as you guys know, this all came from me simply knowing that, hey, I need to get to this element right here so I can calculate the sum. So I'm just going to start going through it now. So iterate through student list. So I'm going to say for I in student lists, student list. Now, when I was first learning lists myself, I was pretty confused, so I would use a lot of print statements. So when I'm doing this, just to make sure I'm working with the sublists, I'm just going to print I and see what happens. So I'm just going to run Python and then my file name, so cat.py, hit enter, and list of calculated sum is not defined. That's interesting. We will figure what this is. I did not save this file. Classic. Okay, so as you can see here, each of these, each I is going to be one of these sublists. You can ignore this last list right here. That's just simply me returning list of calculated sum that I defined up here. But every I is going to be a sublist, which is exactly what I want. So I'm going to get rid of this print statement because I know I'm working with I now. So I is a sublist, and I need to iterate through these sublists. So now I'm going to use for j. I and j are kind of like the classics to use. For j, now what type do I want to use just for j and I, or should I use for j in range length I? Well, according to my algorithm here, I want to figure out the indexes. I want to work with the indexes of this list. So I'm actually going to use for j in I, or range length I. Now remember, the reason I'm iterating through I now is because, as I printed it out here before, I is now an iterable object. It is a list. And I'm using range length. Well, length is going to call the length of I. The length of I is going to be 1, 2, 3. And the range of that is 0, 1, 2. So if I went ahead and I printed out, let's just print J out. So what are you guys expecting? Are you expecting it to be Jimmy, the G number, and this list? Or are you expecting it to be the elements themselves? That is right, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, because we're iterating through the range of I. And that gives us the elements, or sorry, that gives us the indices of every single sublist, because that's what we need to work with. So now how do I work with the actual elements themselves? What if in here I wanted to work with Jimmy, the G number, or anything like that? Because J just returns the index they're at. Well, in this case, since I'm using range length I actually need to wrap it in one of these guys and index for it. So I and then index J. I'm going to hit save, print that out, and okay. So I need to use I if I want the indexes, and I need to use ij if I want to use the actual elements themselves. So now that I know that, so if second index, so if j equals 2, what am I going to do? I'm going to calculate the sum. So I need to create a sum variable, and I also need to create an inner list variable. Now where should I do that? I should keep in mind that this is very similar to the other looping assignments you guys have had. So I'm going to want to do this for every sublist. I want to calculate the sum for every sublist, and then append it to an inner list for every sublist. And every sublist is unique. So there needs to be a way that I can sort of empty this out or reinitialize it so I can start filling it in for the next one. So I'm going to do it right here, right before it goes to the next big sublist. I want to empty it out so I can start filling it in with new information. So I'm going to create two new variables. One is going to be the inner list that I was describing to you guys before, and I'm going to set that up as an empty list. And then I'm also going to have a sum list. So I'm going to call that grades equals 0. So now, if I equals 2, I'm going to calculate the sum. So there are two ways to do this. On the PDF, it didn't say you couldn't use the sum function, so I'm going to go ahead and use that because that's the easiest way in my opinion. So I'm going to do, sorry, I'm having a brain fart here. I'm going to do grades equals the sum of what? Now remember, when I printed j before, it was just the index, but when I used ij, it was actually the element itself, and I want to find the sum of the actual element itself. And then I'm going to append that to inner list. So I'm going to say inner list dot appends grades. So I don't like how it's saying grade and grades. I don't see a grade anywhere on my file here. Let me check. Yeah, there's not. Okay, that's weird. Anyways, so I'm going to append grades there. Now, what if it's not? I still want to keep Jimmy and the G number. So if it's not the second index, I still want to append it. So inner list dot append. And what am I going to append? Well, I'm simply going to append the element itself, ij. If I just appended j, I'd be appending numbers that I do not want. Now, after iterating through this inner for loop here and going through, I literally did not even put this in an else block. Wow. Now, after iterating through this inner block here, once it is finished iterating through this first sublist here, it's going to pop back out, go to the next I, which is the next sublist, and start iterating through this. Now I want to save my work. I want to save everything that's in inner list before it gets reset back to an empty list, and everything in grades before it gets reset back to 0. And like the previous lab, we want to save it on the same indentation as the inner for loop before it goes back out to this bigger for loop. And what do I want to save it into? List of calculated sum. So I just simply say list of calculated sum dot append inner lists. I'm going to hit save, and I'm just going to test this out and see what happens. boom. And as you can see here, I have gotten the desired output. So now I want you to take a good look at this and sort of see what I did here. And then I want you guys to look at this week's lab slides. And if you go down to, I believe it was graded practice 3, wow, this is literally the same exact code, except one line of code has been changed. Literally just this area has been changed to what we actually need to calculate. But we kind of gave you the answer here. This was like the exact same structure down to the T of what like you needed to do, the structure you needed to have. They even had to check the second index in this function here. I would definitely go through this, plug this into Python Visualizer to make sure you understand why I'm initializing this here, why ending it on this indentation here, what I do, what J does in this situation, what IJ does in this situation, why am I iterating through I here? These are all things you guys should get down because that will make future projects a lot easier. Now, the last thing I want to do, well, I want to do two more things. One of them is I want to show you the quickest solution to this. There's actually a solution, a 3-line solution. You can solve this in 3 lines of code. Then I'm also going to show you guys how you can start learning lists, or how I sort of became comfortable with lists after that. So the 3-line solution I'm going to show you guys. Some of you guys actually got this, and I'm impressed about that. But the 3-line solution, well, we know for a fact that within every sublist, we know for a fact that the sublist's second index is going to be what we need to work with. So if we simply say for I in student list, now every I is the sublist, we can simply say I2. So I2 is going to be, this is going to be the first I, this is going to be the second I2 is going to be I012. So I2, we're going to set that equal to the sum of I2. And then we're actually going to simply return student list because we're modifying the list in place here. I'm simply setting this location of the sublist I2 equal to the sum of that sublist I2. I'm going to hit save, run it, and boom, I get the same output. Yeah, this is a very elegant solution. Pretty, it's some of you guys got it. I was impressed about that. You guys clearly weren't expected to do it this way. I just thought some of you might be interested, but I can't stress this enough. Like, we don't make these slides for no reason. This was literally the answer I showed you before. Now, really quickly, I want to show you guys how I learned how to do lists and how I learned how to, not lists, but loops, and how I distinguish when to use range length versus not range length. So obviously, as you can see here, I created a fruit basket with a bunch of fruits. Now, if I just want to look at apple, banana, mango, berry, if I let's say I had a function where I wanted to see, okay, I want to see if there are bananas in this fruit basket. I would simply I'm simply working and accessing the elements themselves. I don't care about their indexes, so I'm simply going to say for fruit in fruit basket. So I could say for I, for J, for X, for soccer in fruit basket. This doesn't matter, but I need to print this variable out. This variable here is going to be what is represented within each of these things. As you can see here, it's been printed out. So what if I wanted to actually know the indices of each of these? What if I wanted to know, I don't know, if I wanted to return the index in which a mango was in my fruit basket? Well, let me just delete that real quick. I'm going to comment this out real quick. I would simply print fruit in this case, because fruit in range length fruit basket, as I showed before, is going to be just an index. So 0, 1, 2, and 3. Now, if I had a function where I needed to work with both indexes and elements, I don't need to create 2 separate for loops from that. I can simply, as you can see here, before I had this same structure of the for loop in my previous loop where I had range length fruit basket and fruits, but if I wanted to print out the actual elements themselves, I index it. So I say the actual lists or containers name followed by the index name, because this is indexing the specific thing. As you can see here, it prints out that. Again, if I just printed out fruit here, it would print out the indexes. So let me know if you have any questions down below.